I think we can all agree that one of the hardest things to manage in our lifetime is worrying thoughts, anxiety, overthinking, right? I know that women in midlife are plagued by these things. And I invited my guest today with the sole purpose of helping you kind of come at this maybe from a different direction than you ever have before. Because our guest is a holistic nutritionist and yoga and meditation teacher. Her name is Heather Lillico. And if you don't want to miss out on her app and how it helps women with anxiety and self-doubt, then you will want to keep listening.
I know your deep, dark secret. You don't like your life. You're a woman in midlife, and for the past 2 decades or more, you've poured yourself in to other people. You've poured yourself into your career, your family, and yet on the inside, you feel broken. And that's no way to be. I'm Dr. Natalie Marr. I'm a clinical psychologist and a life transition expert. It wasn't too long ago that I was in your shoes, waking up in my early 40s, thinking I've got 2 failed marriages, and I'm a single mom for the second time in my life. And I just knew that I could do better, that I could feel better. Fortunately for you, I have about 20 years experience clinically. And so I've created a method that will help you learn to love your story. I know that the story that you're telling yourself about your life feels awful. And I know that you think that you can't change that. I assure you, you can. And when we work together, I'm going to help you to craft a different story, a story that you love, a story that makes you want to get up every single day. Let's work together to help you love your story.
Are you on my mailing list yet? Because if you're not, you really should be. You want to join at learntoloveyourstory.com. If you scroll down, I'm giving away a freebie for you. Honestly, you know what it is? A free course. I sell online courses, but this is a course just for you. And it's about freeing yourself, letting go of what others' expectations and ideas are for you. You know, that nagging self-doubt in your head, it's usually fueled by your consideration of what others think of you over your consideration of what you think of you. And so I teach you in my video all about what is underlying that kind of self-doubt and how to get out of that conundrum. And I give you a workbook that goes with it that helps you to build the skill sets that you're going to need for that. So please make sure you're on my mailing list, because at the least, you're going to get a free gift. And at the most, you're going to hear about all the things that we're doing on Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving and LearnToLoveYourStory.com. And you don't want to be missing out on any of the new things that'll be coming your way. Welcome back, everybody. We have a special guest today, and her name is Heather Lillico. Heather is a holistic nutritionist and yoga and meditation teacher. She teaches overthinking, people-pleasing perfectionists. Does that sound like you? I know it sounds like me. She teaches them how to manage anxiety naturally and holistically. She's been featured on iHeart and Zoomer Radio and in the National Post and Tiny Buddha. Heather is the creator of an anxiety support app called Cultivating Calm, and she has helped hundreds of women find freedom from anxiety and self-doubt. Let's welcome Heather Lillico to the podcast. Welcome to my podcast, Heather. And I would like to just start with a question that I give every one of my guests. Tell us your story. Tell us what got you here today.
Yes, happy to share. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on.
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Natalie. It's great to be here to connect with our audience. So let me give a little bit of background. So I am a holistic nutritionist and a yoga and meditation teacher. And I started working in this area because it was through my own experience with anxiety and with panic attacks that inspired me to take what I've learned and help others. So I'll backtrack a little bit. So growing up, I was always kind of a nervous kid. I had a lot of big emotions and didn't feel like I had the tools to process them. And I was an empath. So any emotions of others, I would just absorb and pick up if someone else was upset. Yeah, it was like a sponge. And I was very sensitive. Any type of criticism I received, I would be in tears. I was a perfectionist. I was terrified of failing, and I was always searching for praise and trying to get that gold star.
Yeah.
And I was
we know nothing of gold stars and people pleasing on this podcast. Nothing at all.
I feel like I might have some commonalities with our audience.
You might. Yep. My listeners, they know the inner mean girl quite well, unfortunately.
Yes. That inner critic. Yeah. And for me, that inner critic voice, it started to get really loud when I went to university, and all of this self-doubt, this pressure to perform, it became too much, and I started to have panic attacks. And I remember the first one I had, I was at a crowded party and my heart started to beat fast. My palms got sweaty, my vision tunneled. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread take over. And so I locked myself in the bathroom and just slid down the wall. And I thought, like, this is it. This is how it ends. Like, I'm dying. And so I started living in fear then of, when is the next panic attack going to strike? Is it going to be when I'm out with friends, while I'm in the middle of a test, while I'm just trying to relax and hang out? So it got to the point where I was so overwhelmed. I was so on edge. I really didn't know where to turn to. So I went to my doctor and I said, I'm having a lot of anxiety. What can we do? And she pulled out a prescription pad and she started writing me out something for anti-anxiety meds. And I said, let's just pause for a second, because I really haven't explored, anything else yet. And so this is how I entered the world of natural wellness. Is I started by changing my diet. I added in some real whole foods that I learned about were helpful for anxiety, and I started to feel calmer. So then I went down this path of feeling like my nervous system was still really amped up all the time. And so I started practicing yoga. And I felt calmer still. And then I still had a million thoughts in my brain, overthinking. So I started practicing meditation. And that was like the last piece of the puzzle that came together for me.
So interesting.
This sort of holistic approach. And so that's what I teach people now. And I've taken all of that of nutrition and mindset and movement, and I brought it together. Now my latest venture is creating an app, Cultivating Calm. So I've pulled all of that together to help people put a system into their life that works in the form of their habits and what they're doing in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. I have lots of questions. because I do think that my listeners will completely see themselves in that story, that it starts when we're really young. Now I, focus on, as the podcast is called Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving. So I focus on women in midlife, because I know that kind of as the social currency tanks, because the youth, we don't have youth on our side. We don't have looks on our side in the same way that we did. And even our caretaking starts to look a lot different as our kids age out of our homes and become, walking, talking adults out in the world. And our jobs look a little bit, there's just millions of ways in which life starts changing significantly and quickly. I think that it kicks up this anxiety. I think it kicks up this kind of thinking. And at the beginning of the year, we had Mary Bushcool, who was, she gave us some lessons on nutrition for women in midlife and exercise and adaptogens, even as our hormones are changing. So that's like the other storyline internally. So I have lots of questions. Like, could you give us a little snapshot of, what is it about nutrition that can benefit you and reducing your anxiety? What is it about yoga? What is it about the meditation? I've talked about meditation and mindfulness, but nutrition and yoga are not my areas of expertise. So I would really love, and I'm sure my listeners would also enjoy hearing more about that.
Cool. Let's dive in. Yeah. So the reason I think these areas, these sort of pillars, nutrition, mindset, movement, why they're so powerful is it's really about the foods that you eat, the thoughts that you think, and the way that you move your body. And all of these work together to regulate the nervous system, to help us feel calmer, to help us feel more in control, and then to provide the building blocks that our body needs. So this is nutrition, right? If we don't have the nutrients we need, which are literally going to become the cells in our body, it's like, how could we feel calm if we don't have the neurotransmitters that have been produced to do that, right? How can we feel calm if we haven't supported our gut bacteria, which are going to balance our blood sugar and help us feel more stable and calm and make a lot of our mood boosting neurotransmitters? Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I do know that like 80% of the serotonin in our body is made in our gut and is intimately connected to microbiome and all of that kind of stuff. And serotonin tends to be the neurochemical that we mess with the most for depression and anxiety medications, like the standard, your Prozacs and your Zoloft's and your,
SSRIs.
Celexas and kind of some of the Paxil, some of these traditional names that are prescribed for both anxiety and depression are serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors. So they're basically trying to make our body use serotonin more effectively because they're thinking it's getting recycled too fast. It could just be we're not making it efficiently, and that could be directly connected to nutrition is what I hear you saying.
It absolutely is. I mean, the sort of precursor to serotonin is the amino acid tryptophan. And when we think tryptophan, we probably think of like turkey and the like sleepy kind of turkey. But what's so interesting about tryptophan is that if you're eating a high protein food, there's actually a lot of competition for absorption, okay? Because we have so many amino acids in a high protein food. So it's actually the foods that have a little bit of protein, but also have fiber that can help that tryptophan get absorbed. So think like your plant-based proteins.
Okay.
Right? So we have like our lentils and chickpeas and beans and soy and tofu, edamame. All of those are going to be great in terms of absorbing the tryptophan so that in the body, it can turn into serotonin and make us feel satiated and calm and happy.
Wow. I had not. That makes a ton of sense, but I hadn't thought of that way. So it isn't just the kinds of foods we're ingesting on the face of them, but like what are they doing internally? How well are they absorbed in our body? And how well is our body absorbing them?
Exactly. How do they interact? And there's such a huge link between people who experience anxiety and people who have digestive issues because they're so tied. And so if someone's experiencing digestive issues, bloating, heartburn, going to the bathroom too frequently or not enough, then we know that something's going on with the gut, and that's going to affect anxiety too, right? Because if we don't have enough good bacteria to help produce some of those neurotransmitters, then we're not going to feel calm. And we have all these sort of like bi-directional signals going on between brain and gut. And so if you're feeling bloated, well, you're probably not going to digest your food as well and then soak up those nutrients that are going to help you feel calm. So it ends up being, this sort of cycle that I think in order for us to get out of, we have to, well, slow down when we eat. This is like the unsexy side of food is like, let's remove distractions. Let's, put the phone away, turn the TV off and really like connect with our food and where it comes from. And then chew thoroughly and slowly and really like take time to eat. And then in that way, these food choices that we can make, real whole foods, lots of nuts and seeds and leafy greens and bright colored fruits and veggies, those are the ones that are going to support anxiety and our mood. Yeah. And we have to make sure that we're consuming them slowly in order to actually digest and absorb them and use those nutrients.
Right. So I hear a lot of plant-based proteins, plant-based fiber sources. So it sounds like in the nutrition side that you really advise us to kind of explore and expand our plant-based eating.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many benefits of plant-based diets, and I'm not saying that it has to be like an all or nothing thing, because I think, the group of people that I typically work with, recovering perfectionists, we tend to get into that mentality, right? Of like, it's so black or white.
So how do I do this perfectly? Come on, Heather, tell us, how do we do it perfectly?
Like, I'm either on the wagon and eating like celery and kale for every meal, or I'm face deep in a bag of chips. And I don't think it has to be that, there's room for the gray here. There's room for everything. So it's not as if we have to have a strict like plants only kind of diet, but it's how can I get in more nutrient dense foods? And I do think that those come from the plant world. We're going to get so many antioxidants in there. Yeah. Typically easier on digestion as well. And we know specifically red meat is inflammatory to the body. It's classified as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning cancer causing by the World Health Organization. And a side effect of inflammation can be anxiety and depression.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any resources, links that I could put in the notes so people could find maybe a nice little cheat sheet of how to get started with this kind of nutrition switch in their life?
Yeah, we can put in the show notes. I have a great free holistic anxiety checklist that
That's
people
great.
can download that lists off the top foods for anxiety. So fermented foods, getting in, a handful of berries every day, a handful of nuts. And it's a totally free resource that people can download. So I'll make sure that folks have access to that so they can start to see where is my diet? How many of these boxes am I ticking off every day? And I think a lot of us out there, we love a to-do list, right? We love having it all laid out.
There's something about us perfectionists. We do like a to-do list. We like check marks. So I was curious if you had anything for us like that. I will make sure for sure that that's in the show notes. So then you moved into yoga. And so the nutrition was helpful to you in your personal story, but it seems like not enough. Like it did some, but it kind of was opened a door to other thoughts. And so why yoga? Why did you go there next?
So it's kind of funny because I fell into yoga by accident. So
I love it. I love stories like this.
I was very focused on boot camp classes and circuit training and high intensity interval training and the most punishing type of workout that I could think of.
Because that goes with a perfectionist idea of the world. It's like the worse it is. And if I do it, then the better off I am. There is just kind of that terrible punishment element to what we do.
Definitely had that association. Like if I'm not absolutely depleted and exhausted after this workout, then it didn't feel successful.
Then I didn't do it right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was really focused on that intense type of exercise. And when I was in university, I was trying to go to a boot camp class and I got the time wrong. So I actually accidentally walked into my very first yoga class thinking that it was a boot camp class. And they pulled out these yoga mats and I thought, well, okay, I'm here. I might as well stay. And I started doing these sun salutations and I thought what is this? And to be honest, I hated it. I thought this is so slow. It makes me tune into my body. And I was not about that at the time. I really had a disconnection from the signals of my body, my intuition, how it felt, what was right for me, what I needed. That was not on my radar.
Yeah.
So at first I really didn't like it. And then a couple months later, I got introduced to it again. A friend took me to a class and I thought, you know what? I am feeling a little bit calmer afterwards this time. And so I started to just dabble a little bit. And what really appealed to me about yoga is that I could learn how to be in a challenging posture and just breathe through it. And that really translated off of the mat when I was having a challenging emotion or, I was having like a conflict with a friend and I could just breathe through it instead of spiraling, which was like my typical tactic. So I started to see how I could sort of translate these lessons off of the mat and into my daily life.
Sure. I can see how perfectionist you was not into it because it didn't have that kind of disciplined, we need to, kind of kill ourselves. And if we are killing ourselves, we're doing it right kind of mentality. So I'm curious, and I think my listeners would also like to hear this from you. What is it about you that you stayed curious that second time you went in with your friend? Because it did make you feel a little calmer. So you must have had some, intuitive sense that you were kind of following to see, maybe I accidentally fell into this. Maybe I'll keep looking and see what's here. What led you down that journey?
That's a good question. I think I was always really interested in growth and healing. And at this point in my anxiety journey, things were pretty rough. Like I was so overwhelmed all the time. And so if I got just a little inkling of some relief from that, then I thought, oh, maybe this is something that I should explore. And, things were just feeling so intense for me. And I really felt like I just didn't know how to heal, what was next? How do I combine these pieces together? And I always found anxiety to be not just the experience of anxiety to be overwhelming, but the process of healing to be overwhelming because I really didn't know where to turn. And so since I got, I think, a little bit of relief after that yoga class, then I started to go back. And, what I noticed when I started going more frequently was at this point, I was already in the career that I started with. I started in public health and then was sort of transitioned into mental health. But after I took a yoga class, after class, I didn't want to check my phone. And I would always want to check my phone and see, what did I miss? What are people up to? What's going on social media? What are my friends doing? Am I being left out? And I would just this mental monologue all the time. And I didn't want to rush and check my phone. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. This is me feeling more connected to myself instead of feeling like I have to connect always outwards. So it really provided this sort of mindset shift.
That's amazing. And it's such a good lesson for all of us to hear. I mean, I know it to be true as a psychologist that we divorce ourselves from our bodies pretty early on when we have a mindset like a perfectionist mindset. In fact, our body becomes kind of a nuisance to us. Like, stop telling me you have to go to the bathroom. Stop telling me that you're hungry and have to do things. Like, we need to stay on track and check the things off the list. And so we learn pretty early on to really ignore and push it off and dissociate from it. So one of the things that I think is so interesting is maybe nutrition was a gateway to you being more in tuned introspectively to your body. And then in doing that kind of interoception, then you were able to kind of listen to it a bit and say, there's something here. I don't want to pick up my phone. And that's curious. And I know that picking up my phone isn't always the best thing for me. And so I want to keep pursuing this just to see what will happen with that. That's pretty amazing, to be honest.
I mean, it's a good point. Yeah, I think, I can always connect the dots in reverse, right? And so at the time, I was like, this, okay, maybe kind of works. And then this maybe kind of works. And then seeing, it was really just a lot of trial and error. Yeah. And then now seeing like, okay, there's a system here. Like, I can see what habits need to happen every day that help me maintain that kind of baseline calm. There's
a quote, and I can't remember who by, but it's something like we only get to know life in reverse, but we have to live life forward. And so it like there is that, like, you're constantly kind of in that dance. But what you're showing us and demonstrating through your story here is that you realized at some point it wasn't working for you because anxiety was uncomfortable enough and you were creating for you suffering enough that you were willing to kind of change things up and look at things differently. And I think even like I should go back and ask you what made you say that to your doctor, because some people won't even start there. They just take the prescription. And you challenged that first doctor and said, let's like back this up and maybe there's some other ways to do this. So there must have been some intuitive sense there as well for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think, I was always like a little bit of a hippie. I think I always sort of wanted to figure things out a bit. And this to me felt like a bit of a puzzle. And I just felt like, for me, and like, I'm not anti-medication or anything. I have a lot of clients who are taking it and it helps us, sort of get to that point where we can do the work. But for me, I just thought like, I just want to explore some other options. Right. And I was worried that if I was taking the medication, I was kind of worried that it would take away a part of me and who I was. Right. And that it would sort of like dull me down in a way. And I thought, I just want to be me. And I just want to be me. Right. And and have like healthy habits in place. And I really hadn't explored that yet. And so I just wanted to kind of pump the brakes. And, I don't really even know what I was expecting from my doctor. I mean, in Canada, at least, like the medical system is so, oh, you have a problem. Okay, here's the immediate solution. And, we'll put a Band-Aid on it. But I really wanted to get to the root of what was going on, of like, why am I feeling so anxious? Like, what is going on? And to me, the medication wasn't going to provide that. It was a deeper exploration that I needed to do.
No. And I mean, I really appreciate how you became a holistic healer as a part of this, because I think medical treatment in North America westernized medicine, because I think there are European countries that are like this as well. I can't say that this is just us. However, like, it just wants to do symptom management. That's it. It doesn't want you to really discover what the symptom is necessarily. I mean, sometimes those go together. When you have strep throat, it's a bacterial infection, they're going to give you antibiotics and that's going to cure that for you. But, for something like anxiety, there's multiple systems that it's affecting. It's our endocrine system, it's our nervous system, it's our psyche, which, for those of us that kind of believe in conscious awareness being something that's kind of even separate from the body mind, or, it's a sliver of it, but it's got kind of its own thing, because your mindset can influence so much about your biology. I mean, where do you begin? Like, really, if you don't do it holistically, and you're only going after a symptom, if the symptom gets suppressed, you're like, okay, good enough, we're done. And that's not really fair to us, right? I mean, it doesn't help us all the way around.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion.
Oh, totally resonate with that. I mean, I felt like I really wanted to tackle some of this because I wanted to be able to live like a big life. I wanted to go after my dreams and put myself out there. And I really felt like anxiety was holding me back. And so I thought, I got to get to the root of what's going on. I got to tackle some of these limiting beliefs, or, some of these things that were coming up that were causing me to feel these sensations of anxiety. And I got to learn how to process my emotions and then release them and let them go. That to me was the true healing.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. So, okay, full circle, meditation. So we did some nutrition, some yoga, and then you still wanted to add a little bit more. And so why meditation for you?
So the meditation was after I had started practicing yoga. And so yoga has a little bit of meditation in it, right? It is sort of like a moving meditation. So I feel like I was exposed to it a little bit, but I had this sort of preconceived notion that meditation meant clearing and emptying my mind. And so when I first started, I would sit there and I would say, okay, don't think. Okay, empty your mind. No, you're thinking. Okay, you're having a thought. Oh, you're really bad at this. God, you should just quit. And it was like this expecting to be perfect kind of mentality. And so it really took me a long time, like months and months, to actually stick with it.
Yeah.
And just like yoga, I did feel a sense of curiosity about it. Like, I'm reading all these things about how incredible it is and how it can change your brain and it can reduce your stress center response, your amygdala in your brain. And I thought, like, there's got to be something to this. So I started trying to do it in a really manageable way. So I would go to YouTube and I would search for like a 5-minute meditation. And I would start with there. And actually, when I was working in mental health, I was working in a mental health hospital. And on Fridays, a coworker and I who shared an office, we would close our door on Friday afternoon. We would put on a meditation on YouTube and we would lay on the floor of our office and we would do a meditation together. And so I started really getting more curious and a bit more serious about it, because after those sessions, I would feel a lot calmer. I would feel more focused. I would feel like I had a bit of a buffer between my reactions to things and what was happening, So if maybe a friend texted me and said, hey, can we talk? Instead of like an immediate, ooh, something's going on, an anxiety spiral, it was like, oh, okay.
Oh, I can handle that. I've got some tolerance for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, oh, it's uncomfortable, but okay. I can take a step back from it. So that, I think, was the real benefit of meditation, is that it gives us this separation from the thoughts, the feelings, to recognize, like, I am not my thoughts. Not every thought I have is a fact. I don't have to give it all my mental focus and attention. And because anxiety is so encompassing, right? It takes up so much mental energy. It's all this second guessing ourselves, and it's just really like a whirlwind that we're kind of stuck in. And what I hear from a lot of clients is that after they have this period of anxiety, they'll say, oh, I wasted so much time worrying. Like whatever I was worrying about never even came true.
Never came. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's
what I love about that observer self, right? Like that's what you're talking about. I think Anxiety really gives us this perspective where we're in it and we can't tell like the difference between us and the thinking or the thoughts. And meditation is just it's a process of kind of pushing back and seeing the backside of your hand. So then you identify, I'm the observer of the thoughts instead of the thoughts themselves. That's a really, perfect example of how that it takes time. It takes time.
It's a
and
practice.
Diligence and practice. But once you do it, then you grasp that it isn't necessarily emptying your mind. It's not identifying with thinking and thoughts as your mind, but with you, the observer of that, as your mind.
Absolutely. So well said. Yes, it is 100% a practice. And just like if you went to the gym, you wouldn't do one bicep curl and walk out of there all ripped and expect that you'd be done, right? We're building over and over. And I find it's the same with meditation. And just like at the gym, you could gradually increase your weight with meditation. We can increase the time that we do. We can, try out different techniques. And probably the most effective one I've seen in terms of perfectionism is self-compassion, is being able to offer ourselves kindness and sort of cut through that critical voice that's so mean that we would never speak to anybody else like that.
Never, ever.
Yeah.
And I preach that over and over on this podcast and in my learntoloveyourstory.com coaching programs and courses, because I really think as you're building self-awareness, if you don't also build the capacity for self-compassion, you're going to see how you've participated in your own suffering and you're going to double down. Especially if you've got that perfectionistic kind of attitude, you're going to be like, I'm just not doing it right. And I just got to, push myself a little harder and then I'll stop, having all of this suffering. And that isn't actually how this works. I mean, the self-awareness of meditation will help you to see where you participate, and that just offers you opportunity to choose differently. But if you don't have compassion when you're looking at that, if you just get self-critical with yourself, kind of just, rewinds you up in that whole negative system that's not working for you.
This is so true, right? And then we get layered with the judgment and shame, and then we stay stuck, right? Because we think this is uncomfortable and it's like, I've done wrong, and we can't move past that then. And we just end up falling off. And this is what I find with a lot of people in their habits is if they feel like they can't do it perfectly, right? If I can't meditate for an hour every day and exercise for an hour and eat, like as people would say, like quote unquote clean diet, then they just don't do anything. And I'm all about what's manageable in your life right now. How can we start to build in more consistency, and then we go for duration, right? Okay, cool. Then maybe we lengthen the walk that you're doing or the yoga class you're taking, but let's start with getting something in every day from these different pillars.
Right, exactly. And I can't say this enough for my own listeners, for women in midlife, because your capacity for stress is reducing. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your biology is doing what it needs to do. And it's moving, creating estrogen from the ovaries to creating estrogen from your adrenal glands. Adrenaline comes from your adrenal glands, right? So we're taxing a very small organ on the top of your kidneys to now create estrogen in your body. And it takes about 10 years. And that's why it's, perimenopause is weird and takes forever. And it's, it's not like an overnight thing that you go into menopause, because there's kind of a transfer from ovaries to adrenal glands for the estrogen to be released. So it is normal that your body can't take stress the same. And yet, like, we as perfectionists want to kill ourselves, like, even more as we start to notice that we can't do this. So it's super important, I think, at this stage in our lives to take some of the advice that you're talking to us about, Heather, and really start to employ just coming at this from a way different level and giving ourselves more tools in our toolbox. And at the very least, just giving ourselves more time to, yoga, meditation, whatever you want to do here, giving yourself space not to have to handle the stress. I think we've earned that at this stage in our lives, for sure. And, and we need it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We cannot stay at the same pace that we have up until this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it requires a bit of a reframe, right? Because sometimes we'll see these self-care practices as like another thing on the to-do list. And then that gets overwhelming, right? And then we feel that sense of shame if we don't check it off at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I sort of re-engineer that so that my day is oriented around these self-care practices. Like these are the most important things that I'm going to do in a day. And so everything else is going to fit around that.
Yeah.
So self-care is not, it's not like a nice to have thing.
No, it's not a negotiable. It's like it has to happen.
Yeah. It's kind of like sometimes we think self-care is like, some flower baskets hanging on a house. It's not. It's the foundation of your home. It's the bones of the home. That's what we're getting through first.
But the mindset thing is so important, the way that you said that, because I think for many women in midlife, Gen X is kind of the generation we're talking about. They were raised by women who had just started to go through glass ceilings, right? Title IX and stuff like that. And so they came from a life of now I get to do anything, right? But unfortunately, what they taught their daughters was now you better do everything. You better be a mom, but you better be a super mom, and you better go have a career, and you better be the best at that career. And so, we blew into in the 80s and 90s the workforce, and we started in a very masculine based culture. And so we were competing against each other. There's all sorts of layers of this mindset that we need to hustle for our worthiness that has to go away. It has to go away because it will not mesh with both our limited capacity for stress. And like that kind of stuff takes away from our care. It doesn't add to our care. But we've believed up until this point that it was giving us the self-worth, that it was giving us the care that we needed. And so we have to rewrite that narrative and come in from a whole different direction with self-care.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. And I think a lot of people realize in that sort of midlife that these things that I thought if I achieved them, they would bring me happiness, that's not the case, right? It's not these external achievements. So then it's kind of like, well, now what? Well, how do I feel happy? How do I feel fulfilled? Right. And that I think comes from putting yourself first and working on your own worthiness. And it's not so much something that we have to work on, it's something that we just have to remember that inherently we are worthy, right? We're born worthy. And that's really what we're reclaiming.
That's what we're reclaiming for sure. That it wasn't something that we created while we were here. It was something that preceded us. We're the only one of us and 8 billion of us on Earth. And millions and billions of us prior and millions and billions of us will still to come. No one will ever be this, right? Nobody's ever going to be Natalie. Nobody's ever going to be Heather. There's only one of us. So really that's where the worth is. And we just have to honor that and learn how to preserve and take care of that rather than hustling to kind of create some sort of worthiness. But there's a lot of social programming around the hustle culture that I think women in my, listeners generation are really still hooked to, unfortunately.
It's an unlearning. And I find women specifically, and I mostly work with women, is that there is that mentality, right, of like putting others first and everyone else's needs come first and you fill up everyone else's cup first and then whatever's left, you get the dribbles. Right. And that's a reframe as well. And I think one of the best ways that we can show ourselves that we are worthy and we are deserving is through our actions, right? It's how are you spending time on yourself? And that's through your habits, right? What time are you dedicating to yourself? That's what shows you that you are worthy and does that sort of reprogramming.
Right. Absolutely. And then it's a succession of small steps. Like, you're not hitting it out of the park nutrition wise and exercise wise the first day that you decide to switch this. You're going to try some more fiber in your diet from plant-based foods that are on the list that Heather's going to share with us. Or you're going to, it's just going to be small little things that you start to do on a daily basis. And the succession of them over time will all add up to a bigger shift in your life and in your existence. Yes. Oh, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's these small changes over time that then we can start to build momentum with.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about your app. I'm really curious about that and how that can help my listeners.
Sure. So Cultivating Calm was developed because I really saw this gap that I think anxiety is overwhelming and a lot of people don't know what steps to take. And
Mm-hmm.
then they end up trying to do everything and then falling off of it and then getting stuck just exactly where they are. So I
Yeah.
wanted to create something that was really convenient for people that they could access, on the go, and that brings together these pieces of the puzzle. So that on
Good.
the app, there's a library of meditations people can
Yeah.
access and like specific anxiety ones. So you have a big meeting coming up, there's a meditation for that. You just are noticing your inner critic is being really mean and loud, there's a meditation for that. You're having a panic attack, a meditation for that. So I wanted it to be really targeted for folks.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a library of yoga classes of all lengths, of all styles. There's like restorative ones, pre-sleep stretches.
Ooh, nice.
Yes, very rejuvenating. And then there's a nutrition area as well. So there's delicious plant-based recipes that incorporate some of these
Nice.
targeted mood-boosting foods so that you can take the guesswork out of like, okay, but what do I prepare? What do I make? I don't have hours every day to cook. Let's make it really simple and really easy. So I wanted to have access for folks with all of that. And then I've designed some courses on the app as well. So these holistic courses that really bring it all together so we can get at, some of the root of what's going on. What are the beliefs we have about ourselves that we need to rewire and reprogram in our brain? Let's do some daily practices working towards that. And then the app
That sounds
also has,
amazing. Wow.
it's a real like work of pride for me because
I
I have
bet.
taken everything that I've struggled with and put it together in an evidence-based way, and then
Yes.
created this sort of community because I also felt like struggling with anxiety was really isolating and alone, and I felt like I'm the only one who's having these thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out that's not
That's
true.
not
And
true.
right? There's so much power in being able to share this and take away that shame.
Right.
So there's this real community aspect to it where we have like a private community board and people can share their wins, their challenges, and what's going on. And then we have live meetings once a month as a community as well, where
Nice.
I teach on a masterclass topic, and we can just come together and just sort of feel that support. And we're all working towards a common goal of living a more calm, a more free life.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, where can they find this app and where can they find you, Heather?
Sure. So I think we'll include in the show notes a link to the app. The app is called Cultivating Calm. So you can search in the App Store or on Google Play, whatever your device is, Cultivating Calm. And there's a free 2-week trial so people can test
Great.
it out. They can start to explore and see how putting these habits into place every day, you already start to feel calmer within those 2 weeks. And then people can connect with me on Instagram is probably the best way. It's at Heather_Lil, Lil, and I share anxiety tips and struggles and how to work through it all on that account.
That's awesome. Yes, we will have all of those links in the notes. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a real treat to hear all of the evidence-based science that's behind your specific program and can help us, because I know my listeners are perfectionists like myself in recovery, kind of. And so many of the tools that we can get, we need for sure. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's great to connect with you and our audience today.
Thank you.
Because I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, I have to make sure at the end of each of these episodes that I give you the disclaimer that none of the material that I talk about in these podcasts is meant to replace any kind of therapy or formal medical or mental health treatment. And in fact, anything that I offer on my website, my coaching programs, any kind of psychoeducational materials that I release are not a replacement for that level of care. So just take that into account when you listen. This is information for you, and hopefully you find it of value, both as an educational tool and for your entertainment. And I also want to mention that if anyone you know is in a mental health crisis, needs additional help, I always include these two crisis resources. They're available to anybody.
Pick up the phone and dial 988 for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
And you can always visit their website at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Additionally, there's actually a crisis text line. So if you're not somebody that likes to pick up the phone,
text HOME, home, to 741-741.
to the crisis text line. And you can find them online at crisistextline.org. Thank you for listening to my podcast. And I hope that you like and follow me wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe consider leaving me a review. It always helps me to keep this podcast relevant when I know what you want to hear about.